He was nothing but skin and bruises, dragging the banker's carriage through town like a mule. "Whoever helps him will face my wrath," the banker warned. But one widow stepped forward and changed everything. The first time she saw him, he was crawling, knees bloodied, back bent low beneath the long leather yoke lashed around his collarbones. Not a mule, not even a man in the banker's eyes, just a thing meant to pull. The wheels of the polished carriage rolled behind him with the weight of a life that had never known hunger. Inside, Emery Pike reclined with a pipe balanced between his fingers, boots kicked up, hat low over his brow. His eyes flicked lazily over the crowd gathering at the edge of the muddy street. The sun was still climbing when the procession passed through the town of Welton Ridge, but already the heat had risen enough to shimmer off the baked dirt. The man pulling the cart wore nothing on his back but rope burns and welts. His ribs showed like knotted cords beneath his skin, each breath more a tremble than an inhale. No one stepped forward. They'd heard what Pike said the first time he rolled in weeks ago, gloved hands resting easy on the velvet seat. "This one's mine. He's paid his debt. Anyone who touches him, helps him, feeds him will face my wrath. You got sympathy, pray it out, don't act on it." So they hadn't. Not when the man collapsed last time. Not when Pike poured water on the ground instead of into the tin cup dangling from the rear of the wagon. Not even when the man had once whispered for help, just once, before Pike lashed him silent. But this time someone did. Nora Brightwell had only returned to Welton Ridge that week, her morning dress still crisp, veil still neatly pinned. Folks said she was too young to be a widow, and maybe she was. But death didn't ask about age when it came for a man's lungs and left a woman with silence. She'd come back for reasons no one asked about. Bought her parents' old homestead with what little she had left and started over. But that morning, when she stepped out to the dry porch with a basket of sewing and saw the man dragging Pike's carriage through town, she didn't see a criminal. She saw a boy her husband once carried out of a flood. Same eyes, same quiet ache beneath the pain. She dropped the basket. He stumbled then, fell hard onto one elbow. The leather yoke twisted as the wheels bumped forward and Pike didn't stop. The banker leaned out and thumped the side of the carriage twice. "Up," he said without looking. "We've still got calls to make." The man tried, hands dug into the dirt, legs shaking too hard to obey. His shoulder gave out. And that's when Nora moved. She didn't think, she didn't wait. She stepped into the street, skirts dragging through the dust, and knelt, one hand on his back, one beneath his ribs. The entire town seemed to gasp at once. Pike turned slowly, his lip curled. "What did I say?" Nora looked up, her hand stayed firm. "You said wrath, not law." The banker smiled like a man humored by a child. He stepped out of the carriage in clean boots, walking slowly toward her as if he had all the time in the world. "I'll say it again," he said softly. "This man is mine. He signed a bond. He owes me 3 years of labor. He's got one left." Nora stood, blocking the fallen man with her body. "Then sue him. Don't beat him to death in front of children." That got a reaction. The banker's smile fell just a fraction. "You think I won't ruin you?" "You already tried once," Nora said evenly. "My husband borrowed from you when his lungs went bad. He died in that bed before he could pay a cent back. I buried him with nothing." Emery Pike's nostrils flared. "So that's what this is, revenge." "No," Nora whispered. "It's mercy, something you forgot how to give." He didn't respond, not with words. He raised a gloved hand and 2 of his hired men stepped from behind the wagon, both broad, both armed. The townspeople tensed but didn't interfere. They knew how Pike worked. Laws meant nothing when money bled into every office and every badge. But just before the men reached her, a voice broke from the crowd. "Don't." It was Sheriff Warren, older now, slower, but still the one man Pike hadn't bought. He stepped forward, palm resting on his revolver. "Let her take him," Warren said. "He's half dead, Emery. You want your year's labor. Take it up in court." The banker's jaw ticked. His fingers twitched once, then lowered. "You'll regret this," he muttered. "Already do," Warren said. "Now leave." Pike returned to the carriage without another word. His men followed. The town stayed quiet until the wheels rolled away toward the South Ridge. Only then did Nora kneel again. The man was barely conscious. His lips were cracked, his eyes sunken. But when she touched his cheek, he whispered something, one word. Why? She couldn't answer. She just wrapped her arms around his shoulders and lifted. He didn't weigh much. Nothing about him had been fed in months, but the weight of what she'd just done, it settled on her chest like a stone. Back at her homestead, she laid him gently on the cot by the hearth. The fire was still low from the morning, but it gave off enough warmth. She stripped away the harness, wincing at the wounds beneath. Raw skin, infections trying to take hold. She cleaned what she could, whispering soft apologies with every touch. He didn't speak again, just flinched when the cloth found the worst spots. She left him wrapped in the only wool blanket she had, and sat by the table staring at the flame until night fell. The next morning, he was still breathing. Barely, but breathing. He woke with a sound that wasn't quite a groan and wasn't quite a word, more like air catching in a throat that hadn't known comfort in too long. His eyes opened slow, too slow, and darted around the room like an animal waiting for the next blow. The moment he saw her, he flinched. Nora didn't move. She was sitting by the hearth, sleeves rolled, hair braided back, a chipped mug of coffee in her hands gone cold long before he stirred. She'd been watching him breathe all night, counting each shallow rise and fall like they were prayers. She didn't know what he'd seen behind his eyelids, but his mouth had twisted like someone trying to scream without a voice. She hadn't slept. Now she watched as he tried to push himself up and failed. She set the mug aside. Don't, she said, rising. You'll rip the stitches. He blinked, disoriented, then looked down. His chest was bandaged now, and so were his arms. The rope wounds had reopened when he collapsed in the street, and she'd spent hours scrubbing the filth from each one. Her hands still smelled faintly of vinegar and boiled herbs. You're safe, she said again, slow. You're in my home, no one's coming. His mouth opened. A croak came out. She offered him water from a tin cup, holding it steady to his lips. He drank like a man who'd forgotten what swallowing was, coughing halfway through, eyes watering. But he kept going. He emptied the cup. When he finished, he leaned back, still looking at her like he couldn't decide if she was real. Nora spoke softly, "What's your name?" He hesitated, then hoarse as a breeze through dry leaves, "Reed." It wasn't much, but it was enough. She nodded once. "Reed, I'm Nora." She didn't press, didn't ask where he came from or how he ended up yoked to a banker's carriage like a beast. She didn't need to. His body told enough of the story, scars old and new, bruises that hadn't even begun to fade, eyes that didn't know what kindness looked like anymore. She laid another blanket over him and returned to her chair. For a long time, neither spoke. Outside, the wind picked up. Late spring in Welton Ridge still had sharp teeth, and the pine trees lining the back hill swayed and creaked like old bones. Chickens rustled in the coop. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once and fell silent again. And still, Reed lay in the cot, watching her like he was waiting for the other shoe to drop. It didn't. By evening, he'd eaten half a bowl of broth and managed to sit up without falling over. His hands trembled when he reached for the spoon, and he spilled most of it before it reached his mouth. But she didn't comment, just handed him a cloth and poured a little more. He stared into the bowl. "You shouldn't have helped me," he muttered. Nora didn't look up from the stitching in her lap. Too late for that. "He'll come back, Pike." "I know." Reed said nothing after that. He finished the broth, slow and clumsy, then leaned back again, breath shallow. Nora didn't try to fill the silence. She just kept stitching, a rhythm as old as grief itself. It was the next morning before he asked, "Why?" She paused mid-thread. "Why what? Why did you do it?" Her fingers clenched around the needle. She thought for a moment, then set the fabric aside. Her voice was steady when she answered, "Because I've seen what happens when no one does." He turned away from her, ashamed. "You'll lose everything." "I already did," she said. "I buried my husband less than 2 months ago. The house, the land, the debts, none of it means anything if I have to walk past someone dying in the street and do nothing." Reed looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time his face softened, not with hope, not yet, but with something close to understanding. "I won't stay long," he said. "You'll stay until you can stand without shaking," Nora replied. "After that, we'll see." Pike returned 3 days later. He didn't ride in with fanfare this time. No hired men at his side. Just him and his gelding, polished boots, and a face carved from smug stone. He stopped in front of Nora's porch, dismounted slow, and leaned against the railing like he owned it. Nora stood in the doorway. "I hear you're housing a thief," he said casually. "I'm housing a man," Nora replied. Pike grinned. "That man owes me a year, signed a bond, his labor's mine." "Then take it to the courts," she said. "The sheriff already told you." "Oh, I plan to," he said, adjusting his gloves. "But justice takes time. Regret moves faster. Thought I'd give you a chance to reconsider before things get unfortunate." She stepped down from the porch, meeting him eye to eye. "If anything happens to this place or to me, Sheriff Warren won't be the only one you answer to." "You think that old man scares me?" "No," she said. "But the people in this town remember what happened the last time you went too far. You try anything again, and even your money won't clean the blood off your name." Pike's eyes darkened. "You think one broken man is worth all this?" She didn't hesitate. "Yes." He stared at her a moment longer, then mounted his horse, spat in the dirt, and rode off. That night Reed didn't sleep. He sat on the edge of the cot, clutching the blanket like a lifeline. Nora saw him through the lamplight, eyes haunted and distant. "Did he hurt you before Welton?" she asked. He didn't answer at first, then every day. "Why'd you sign the bond?" Reed exhaled, shaky. "Because I had nothing, no family, no food, no place. He found me half-starved and promised 3 meals a day, said all I had to do was work. I believed him. First month it was cleaning, second it was hauling. By month 6 I was the mule." Nora's hands trembled as she held her tea. She didn't speak, just listened. "I thought I'd die that way," he whispered. "You didn't," she said. "Not yet." By the end of the week, Reed could stand. His legs were still thin, still shaking, but the bruises had faded to yellow and the rope wounds had begun to scab. He spent most of his days helping in small ways, chopping kindling when he could, hauling water, mending fences with one arm still strapped to his chest. Nora didn't hover, she let him find his rhythm. But she watched him all the same, watched how he paused at every loud noise, how he flinched when something fell, how he kept his back to the wall whenever he entered a room. It took 3 more days for him to laugh. Just once, a short huff of breath when the goat tripped over its own feet. But it was a sound Nora hadn't expected, and she smiled without realizing it. Reed noticed, and for the first time he smiled too. But peace was not a gift this land gave easily. The next morning, Nora found a letter nailed to her door. One word scrawled in red ink. "Thief." Her throat went dry. She ripped it down and burned it in the hearth before Reed saw it, but she knew what it meant. Pike wasn't done. He was watching. And worse, others might be helping him. It started with the letter, but that was only the beginning. The days that followed darkened like bruises on soft skin, quiet at first, then swelling into something heavier, something that wouldn't be ignored. Nora kept the front gate latched. She double-checked the locks every night, though she'd never bothered with that before, not in Welton Ridge. This wasn't a place that required barricades, but Pike had a way of turning trust into weakness. It wasn't just him she feared, it was what he stirred in others. Reed offered to sleep outside the house, said it would be better just in case trouble came, but she refused. "You're not a dog," she told him, her voice sharp in a way it hadn't been since her husband passed. "You're not sleeping on the porch." So he stayed on the cot, and at night when the wind rattled the panes and the dark pressed hard against the windows, she heard him mutter in his sleep, sometimes words, sometimes just sounds, but always pain. He never asked for more than a cup of water, a bite of bread. He worked from dawn till dusk, even when the blisters reopened and bled through the wraps on his hands. And still, the town turned colder. Nora noticed it at the general store. Where once folks would smile politely, now they kept their distance. Conversations stopped when she walked in. The grocer wouldn't look her in the eye. When she asked for salt, he said he was out, though she could see the tins lined neatly on the shelf behind him. "Come back next week," he muttered. She left empty-handed. At the well, 2 women whispered behind their shawls. One of them, Mrs. Halber, had once sat with Nora for hours after her husband's passing, but now her mouth was thin, her voice clipped. "You shouldn't poke the lion," she said as she passed. "Sometimes it bites back." Reed didn't see most of it. Nora kept it from him as best she could, but he felt it. He saw the way she returned from town with her basket still half empty. He noticed when the neighbors' children stopped waving, and he heard the silence. A silence that used to be filled with kindness, now hollowed out with fear. He offered to leave again. She shut him down. "You want to give him what he wants?" she asked. "He wants to make me regret helping you, wants me to see the cost and back down." "I don't want you hurt," Reed whispered. Nora looked at him long and steady. "Then don't give him the satisfaction." Trouble came 2 nights later. It was near midnight when the sound shattered the stillness, glass breaking, wood splintering. Nora sat bolt upright, heart pounding. The back window. She grabbed the lantern and flew from her bed, her bare feet slapping against the cold floorboards. Reed was already on his feet in the front room, pale, his bandages loose and spotted with blood. He held a fire poker in both hands, knuckles white. Another crash came from outside, the chicken coop, then silence. Nora lifted the lantern toward the window, her breath caught. The coop was in pieces. The door torn from its hinges, hens scattered, feathers drifting like ash in the wind, and scrawled across the side of the barn in something dark and dripping. "Thieves die." Reed moved beside her, trembling, not with fear but with fury. "I know who did this," he said. She set the lantern down and put a hand on his shoulder. "You don't know that." He shook his head. "I do. I saw them watching earlier. 2 men I used to see around Pike's property. Hired hands, they never smiled, always had knives on their hips." "Names?" she asked. He hesitated. "One was called Boone, the other Merritt, I think." Nora nodded slowly. She knew both, had seen them slinking through town on Pike's leash. They weren't local and they didn't care to blend in. Sheriff Warren arrived by sunrise, summoned by Nora's handwritten note sent by a neighbor boy willing to ride the trail early. When he saw the coop, the words on the barn and the fear behind Nora's eyes, he sighed and rubbed the stubble on his chin. "I'll talk to him," Warren said. "You think that'll help?" Nora asked. "I don't know," he admitted, "but Pike's smart enough not to leave proof, and his men, their shadows, hard to pin a ghost." Nora folded her arms. "So you'll wait until one of us bleeds?" Warren looked at Reed, who stood in the doorway, face hard. "I've got 1 deputy and too many quiet threats. My hands are tied, Nora, but I'm watching him. That's all I can promise." It wasn't enough. That night Reed didn't sleep, not even a little. He sat at the table with a knife laid flat in front of him, his eyes locked on the door. Nora brought him stew, but he barely touched it. "Eat," she said. "Not hungry." "You need strength." "I need to be ready," he whispered. She didn't argue, just sat across from him, the fire crackling low, the shadows shifting on the walls like old ghosts dancing. After a long pause, Reed spoke again. "I had a brother once. He was younger, smaller, sick all the time. I did everything I could to keep him fed, took jobs in town, chopped wood, hauled freight. But when Pa died, debt came faster than I could work. One day, Pike showed up with a bond, said he'd wipe it all clean if I signed. I did." He looked down at the knife. His hand twitched. "By the time I got loose enough to try and run, I found out my brother had already died. Malnourished. Alone. I missed his funeral by 2 years." Nora didn't speak. Her eyes were wet, but she let him finish. Reed's voice broke. "He died waiting for me to save him." "You didn't fail him," she said softly. "I did." "No," she said. "Pike did, and if you give up now, he wins again." He looked at her and something shifted behind his eyes. A quiet steel, not rage but something heavier, resolve. The next morning, they buried what was left of the chickens. The coop was too damaged to salvage quickly, but Reed insisted on helping build a new one. Even with his wounds still raw, he sawed wood, hammered nails, and didn't stop even when his shirt clung wet with sweat and blood. Neighbors watched. No one offered help. But someone did leave another note. "Judgment comes soon." This one had no name, no signature, just the smell of pipe smoke still lingering when Nora found it. She burned it like the last. That evening, just before sunset, Reed was chopping firewood when he spotted something at the edge of the property. A man on horseback, watching from the tree line. He didn't move, didn't wave, just sat there like a statue, a rifle slung across his back. Reed dropped the axe and marched toward the trees. Nora saw him go and called out, but he didn't stop. By the time she caught up, the rider had turned and disappeared into the woods. Reed stood panting, fists clenched. "I'm done hiding," he said. "Then what?" she asked. "I take the fight to him." "Reed." "No, you risked everything for me. I can't let him keep doing this." "You're not strong enough yet," she said. "You can barely swing that axe for more than a minute." "Then give me 1 more week," he said. 7 days, that's all I need." She stared at him, at the fury in his voice, at the desperation to be more than just a victim. 7 days, she agreed, then we end this. But the final blow came on day 6. They returned from the woods, gathering timber for the barn repairs, to find the front door swinging open. Inside, the house had been torn apart, furniture broken, blankets ripped, the cot splintered to kindling, and carved into the wood above the hearth. "Run!" Nora stood frozen. Reed stepped in front of her, shielding her instinctively, but she moved past him slowly, picking up a piece of torn fabric, one of her husband's old shirts, now shredded beyond repair. "This was never about just you," she said softly. "This was about punishment." Reed turned to her. "We can't wait any longer." "No," she said, "we can't." The cabin didn't feel like a home anymore. Not after that. Not with the air so still inside, like it was holding its breath. Reed swept up the splinters without speaking. Nora stood in the doorway, arms crossed tight over her chest, staring at the carved warning above the hearth until the last light faded from the sky. That night they slept in the barn. Reed insisted he keep watch. He sat by the door with the shotgun propped against his leg and eyes that didn't close once, even when the wind screamed through the slats in the roof and the animals stirred in their pens. Nora lay curled in the hayloft with her father's old pistol tucked beneath her pillow, dreams broken by every sound, every snap of a branch, every whisper of breath that didn't sound like her own. But the night passed without attack. And when the morning came, it brought with it the clearest sky they'd seen in weeks, pale blue and cold, like glass left out too long. Nora stood at the edge of the ridge, hair tied back, hands calloused from work she never planned to do alone. Beside her, Reed set the last board against the frame of the new coupe and wiped sweat from his brow. The bruise on his ribs had faded, but the one in his heart still throbbed. "I think I'm ready," he said. Nora turned. "Ready for what?" "To end this." She looked at him a long time. "How?" "By making sure the whole town sees him for what he is. Not just me, not just you, everyone." Nora nodded slowly. "You want a confrontation?" "No," he said. "I want the truth, and if it comes to confrontation, so be it." They spent that afternoon preparing. Nora rode into town under the pretense of collecting supplies, but instead she spoke with the only 2 people who hadn't turned from her since she took Reed in, Sheriff Warren, and the preacher, Elias Callum. Both men listened carefully as she told them what Pike's men had done. The notes, the threats, the attack on her home. "Without proof, my hands are tied," Warren said, regret deep in his voice. "I believe you, but you know what Pike will say. You did this yourself to stir sympathy." "I know," Nora said. "That won't stop me from watching his every move," Warren added. "But if you've got a plan, I'd suggest you make it clean, legal, loud." The preacher leaned forward. "You want eyes on your side. Bring them to the Sunday gathering. Let Pike show his fangs in God's house. I've seen more devils unmasked beneath hymns than any gallows." Nora agreed. She returned home before sunset, dust trailing behind the mare like a ribbon of smoke. Reed waited by the gate. "What did they say?" he asked. "They'll be there," she replied. "Warren, the preacher, and the rest of the town. If Pike comes, he'll come with a show. Then we give him one." Sunday came like thunder, wrapped in velvet. The church sat on the hill outside Welton Ridge, its white steeple a crooked finger pointing at heaven. Inside, the pews were full, more full than they'd been in years. Word had spread. Something was going to happen. They didn't know what, but they felt it. Reed walked in beside Nora, dressed in the only proper shirt she had left from her husband's closet. The sleeves were short, and it pulled tight across his shoulders, but it hid the worst of his scars. His head was held high. His limp was barely noticeable now. People stared. Some looked ashamed, others curious. A few scowled outright, but no one spoke. They took a seat near the front. And then, like a scent drifting in on rot and roses, Emery Pike entered the room. He wasn't dressed for worship. His coat was dark, embroidered. His boots too clean. He didn't remove his hat. He strode down the aisle like he was inspecting livestock, not attending service. Behind him trailed Boone and Merritt, each with hands resting on their belts, eyes scanning the crowd like vultures in a cornfield. Pike paused beside Reed's pew. "Well," he said with a smile too wide, "looks like the whole circus came to town." Nora didn't flinch. "You're blocking the aisle." He tipped his hat mockingly. "Of course." The preacher called everyone to stand. Voices rose in song, shaky at first, then steadier as the chorus caught. Reed didn't sing. He watched Pike through narrowed eyes, waiting for the moment. When the final hymn faded, Preacher Callum stepped forward. He read from the book of Psalms, a passage on justice, on the crushed being lifted, on the wicked perishing like chaff in the wind. His voice didn't waver. He didn't name names. But every eye in the room drifted to Pike. Then, as the service neared its end, Reed stood. It was not planned. He rose slowly, hands clenched at his sides, breath shallow. "I got something to say," he said, loud enough to stop every rustle of coat and boot. All eyes turned to him. The preacher nodded once. "Say it." Reed stepped into the aisle. His voice trembled, but he didn't stop. "My name is Reed Langston. I signed a bond a year and a half ago. I was starving. Thought I was getting a chance to work and live. What I got was beatings, chains, hunger. What I got was a yoke strapped to my shoulders and a whip across my back." The church was dead silent. "I pulled that man's carriage for 14 months, slept in mud, ate once every 2 days. If I begged for mercy, I was whipped harder. I wasn't treated like a man. I was a beast. And when I collapsed, when my body gave out, Nora Brightwell saved my life." He looked at Pike. "And for that, you tried to ruin her." Pike laughed, "And there it is." He stepped forward. "This man is a liar," he said smoothly. "He broke his bond, ran like a dog in the night. I treated him fairly, fed him, clothed him, gave him work when no one else would. And now he stands here trying to defame me in front of God." He looked around the church. "How many of you have taken bonds before? How many of you know the risk of helping someone who turns on you the moment you show kindness?" Merritt stepped forward. "We've got witnesses," he said. "Letters, contracts." Boone nodded. "Proof." Sheriff Warren stood. "You got those letters?" he asked. Merritt hesitated. "You got any proof you didn't beat this man half to death?" the sheriff pressed. No answer. "You got any neighbors who saw him fed, clothed, treated right?" Warren continued. "'Cause all I've seen is a man who looked half dead being dragged through town like a plow horse." The tension snapped. Whispers rose. Preacher Callum raised his hand. Quiet. Then he turned to Pike. "You call this church a place of lies, Mr. Pike." Pike opened his mouth. Callum spoke over him. "Then you are free to leave it, but you will not walk these floors with violence in your heart and deception on your tongue." The room buzzed. Warren stepped forward. "I'm putting this to court. Reed, if you'll swear a statement, I'll take it to Judge Holloway." Reed nodded. Nora stepped forward. "I'll swear one too." Then others stood. The blacksmith, the schoolteacher, a mother who'd once seen Reed try to drink from a trough in Pike's yard. One by one they stood, quietly, slowly, until nearly a third of the church was upright. Pike's face twitched. "You think this scares me?" he hissed. "No," Warren said, "but it should." The trial didn't come that week. It didn't even come that month. But the tide had turned. Pike left Welton Ridge the next day. His men followed. Reed stayed. The cabin was rebuilt. The coop repaired. New hens gifted by the schoolteacher who said her own flock had started laying double, an answer to a prayer maybe. Nora found herself smiling more. So did Reed. But peace doesn't stay still. It waits. The weeks after the church gathering felt almost borrowed, as though Nora and Reed were living on time not meant for them. Pike had vanished, his men with him, and Welton Ridge breathed easier. The neighbors who had turned cold now warmed again, though the warmth was cautious. They stopped crossing the street when Nora passed, stopped whispering at the well. A few even came by with quiet offerings, a jar of preserves, a loaf of bread, half a sack of feed. They didn't apologize outright, but in their own way they were saying they'd chosen fear before, and now they were ashamed of it. Nora accepted what was given with grace, but she never forgot how quickly their kindness had withered when Pike's shadow loomed. Reed noticed too, but he didn't say anything. He spent his days mending what had been broken, building fences stronger than before, tending to the new hens as though they were more than chickens, guardians of normalcy. At night, he sat by the hearth, his long frame bent over scraps of wood he whittled into small figures, birds mostly, or little carved crosses. He said little about them, but Nora could see in the careful lines and steady hands that it was a way of mending himself. And yet neither of them was fooled. One evening, as twilight slipped down the ridge, Reed stood by the porch with the last light burning across his face. "He's not gone," he said quietly. Nora didn't ask who, she knew. "No," she agreed, "he is. He'll wait until the law cools, until people forget what they saw." Reed's eyes narrowed. "Then he'll come back." Nora studied him. His shoulders had filled out again, his cheeks no longer hollowed by hunger. He looked stronger. But behind his eyes there was still a man who had been broken and hadn't yet decided if he was allowed to stand tall. "We'll be ready," she said. Reed gave a short laugh, almost bitter. "You don't know what men like him can do." "I know enough," Nora replied. "I buried a husband who owed him. I've seen what his debts turn men into." She reached out, laid her hand lightly on Reed's arm. "And I know that if we keep living in fear of when he'll come, he's already won." Reed looked at her hand, then at her face. He didn't answer, but he didn't pull away either. A month later, news rode into town on the back of a peddler's wagon. Pike was sighted 2 valleys east, traveling with a half-dozen men. No more carriages this time, no velvet coats or lazy afternoons smoking pipes. He was armed. His men were armed, and they were asking questions about Welton Ridge. The sheriff heard it first. By nightfall, the whole town knew. That Sunday after the service, the townspeople lingered in the churchyard instead of going straight home. The air was thick with murmurs, half whispers of dread, half calls for standing firm. Reed stood at the edge of the crowd, arms crossed, watching. He felt their eyes on him, measuring him, wondering if he'd brought the trouble on their heads by not dying quietly under Pike's yoke. Nora stepped closer. "Ignore them," she murmured. "I can't," he said. "They think I lit the fire, but it was Pike who struck the match." Sheriff Warren walked up then, his weathered face pinched tighter than usual. "Word is, Pike's planning to return inside the month, and he's not coming to sue in court." "What are you going to do?" Nora asked. "I'm one man, Nora," Warren said. "I'll stand against him as best I can, but Pike's got money enough to buy 6 more like me. The judge won't get here in time. The law won't hold him. Only thing we've got is each other." Reed's jaw clenched. "Then we don't wait for him to come knocking, we choose the ground." The sheriff eyed him, slow and heavy. "You sure you're strong enough?" Reed's eyes burned. "I'm sure I can't let him tear this place apart again." Nora looked at both men. The silence between them carried the weight of inevitability. Pike was coming, and when he did, he would not come to negotiate. The days turned restless. Nora couldn't walk the ridge without checking over her shoulder. Reed worked harder than ever, every swing of the axe sharper, every fence post driven deeper, as if building fortifications not just against cattle wandering, but against Pike himself. Nights stretched long. Sometimes Reed paced the floorboards until dawn, his shadow restless against the glow of the lamp. And then came the second warning. It was near dusk when Nora found it. Another note, nailed to the barn door with a rusted spike. The words were crude but clear. "The widow dies first." She stood frozen, her breath caught in her throat. Her hands shook as she ripped it free. Reed came running when he heard the cry, and when he saw the paper, his face darkened in a way she had never seen. "No," he said, almost a growl. "He won't touch you." "Reed, I'll put him in the ground before he gets the chance." There was no trembling in his voice this time. No shame, just iron. Nora placed her hand on his cheek, forcing him to meet her eyes. "Don't let him turn you into what he is. Promise me that." His chest rose and fell. For a moment she thought he'd refuse. But then quietly, "I promise." 2 nights later, the dogs barked. Reed was first to the door, rifle in hand, his silhouette tense in the moonlight. Nora followed, clutching the pistol her father had left her. The night air was sharp, filled with the smell of pine and the sound of hoofbeats just beyond the ridge. A lantern swayed in the dark, bobbing closer, then another, and another. Reed whispered, "He's here." The hoofbeat stopped at the fence line. Then a voice, smooth as ever, drifted across the night air. "Reed Langston, Widow Brightwell, I told you what happens when folks meddle where they don't belong." Nora's heart thundered. She glanced at Reed. His jaw was set, his grip steady on the rifle. Pike's voice sharpened. "You've got one chance, send him out. Let me take what's mine and maybe I leave the house standing." The silence after was deafening. The only sound was the wind threading through the trees. Nora stepped forward. "You'll never have him again." The men outside laughed, a cruel chorus. Pike's tone hardened. "Then you've chosen your graves." A gunshot cracked the night. Splinters flew from the porch rail inches from Reed's arm. Nora gasped, dragging him back inside as the air filled with the thunder of hooves. It had begun. The siege of the cabin stretched till dawn. Pike's men circled, firing shots at the shutters, hollering threats, letting the night itself become a weapon. Reed and Nora returned fire sparingly, never wasting a bullet. The sheriff had promised to come if trouble came, but they both knew Pike had chosen his hour well, midnight on a moonless night, when Warren would be miles away on the other side of town. By the time the horizon softened with the first gray of morning, the air smelled of gunpowder and smoke. The barn had taken a bullet, one hen lay dead in the yard, and the shutters were scarred with holes. But Reed still stood. Nora still held her pistol, and the cabin still held. Then Pike called out again, his voice hoarse but steady. "Sun's coming up, and so is the end of you. I gave you a chance. You spit on it. Now you'll watch her die first, Reed, just like your brother." Reed froze. The color drained from his face. Nora turned sharply. "What did he say?" Reed's lips moved, but no sound came. His brother dead, Pike knew. Pike had used it like a blade. "And it cut." Nora grabbed his arm. "Don't let him have you, Reed, not like this." But Reed's hands were already shaking, not with fear, but with rage. He stepped to the door, rifle raised, ready to end it one way or another. Reed stood in the doorway, breath shallow, the rising sun brushing across the porch in long orange fingers. It painted him in light like it meant to cleanse him, but inside, beneath the skin, beneath the bone, there was a storm that no sunrise could touch. Nora could see it in his eyes. Not fear, not grief. Rage. A kind of old rage, the kind you bury until someone like Pike digs it back up and shoves it in your chest like a hot iron. The cabin door was half splintered already. The shutters battered, the fence broken. They had held out all night, just the two of them, their ammunition low and their strength thinner than they dared admit. But Reed's hands didn't shake now. Not anymore. Nora stepped beside him, eyes never leaving the yard where Pike's riders waited in a crooked line beyond the smoking fence. Pike sat atop a black gelding, too polished for a man who crawled through mud. His hat was cocked low, a sneer pulling at his mouth like a wound that never healed. He didn't look tired. He looked patient, like a man who knew time always bent toward money and cruelty if you held it long enough. "You step out there now, you won't come back," Nora said quietly. Reed didn't blink. "That might be fine with me." "No, it's not," she snapped. "Don't you talk like that, not now, not after all this. You survived hell, Reed Langston. Don't go dying in the front yard like you never crawled out of it." He turned his head slowly, the tension in his jaw visible. "He's threatening you. And I've faced worse than a man who's too scared to fight without 5 others behind him. I don't want you to pay for helping me." "I already did," she said, "but I don't regret it, not for 1 second." That softened him, just a little, enough for him to lower the rifle an inch. "You step out there," she said again. "You give him what he wants. You make him the victim and you the outlaw." Reed looked down at his hands, calloused, bruised, but steady. "What then?" he whispered. "We wait till he burns this place to the ground." "No," she said. "We wait till Warren gets here, till there's enough daylight for someone besides him to see clearly." Reed's gaze drifted back to the line of men at the edge of the property. He saw Boone there, sharpening a knife without urgency. Merritt with his shotgun laid across his lap, chewing something with open-mouthed indifference. Pike stayed mounted, untouched by ash or sweat, watching. "We don't have much time," Reed murmured. Nora reached for his arm. "We just need enough." The standoff dragged. Morning climbed slow and bright, burning the fog away until the shapes of Pike's men became clearer, 6 in total. Only 2 wore badges, but Reed knew what they meant. Mercenaries, hired lawmen from 2 towns over. Not bound by honor or truth, just contracts. Guns for gold. They didn't make a move, not yet. Pike was too clever for that. He wanted the sun high and the crowd larger. He wanted to be seen, to have witnesses when he crushed them under the boot heel of justice. And right on cue, the town began to arrive. It started with one rider, Sheriff Warren, dust at his heels, coat flapping in the wind like a flag of stubborn law. He rode fast, his hat pulled low, and when he saw the men outside Nora's fence, he didn't slow. He reined up in front of the porch, dismounted quick. "You all right?" he asked, eyes flicking between Reed and Nora. "We held," Nora said. Warren nodded once, then turned to the road. Others followed, the preacher, the blacksmith, the storekeeper who once refused to sell Nora salt. By mid-morning, nearly 20 stood along the path that led to Nora's homestead, some holding rifles, some with arms crossed, some empty-handed but present all the same. Not all were friends, not all believed, but they were there, and that mattered. Pike saw them and smiled. "Look at this," he called. "A whole town gathered for a show. You here to watch your heroes fall." Warren stepped forward. "I'm here to uphold the law." "Then uphold it," Pike shouted. "That man," he pointed at Reed, "broke his bond, fled his labor, committed theft by time and body. That woman," he pointed at Nora, "harbored him, fed him, armed him. That's aiding a fugitive." Reed stepped off the porch. Nora caught his sleeve. He gently pulled free. "It's time." She swallowed but nodded. "Be careful." Reed walked slow toward the gate. Every eye followed him. He didn't raise his rifle. He didn't raise his voice. "I fulfilled that bond," he said. "And then some. You had me dragging a cart like a mule, whipping me for missing steps, starving me for praying too long. That's not labor. That's slavery." Pike's face twisted. "You signed." "I signed for a chance to live. You turned it into a death sentence." "You ran," Pike hissed. "You disappeared like a rat in daylight." "I collapsed in the street," Reed corrected. "And your answer was to beat me in front of children." Gasps from the crowd. "You never meant to let me finish my debt," Reed continued. "You meant to own me until I died." Pike spat. "You think this town will save you?" Reed's voice rang out. "They won't have to, because I'm not yours to take anymore." Pike dismounted, stepping forward slow, like a panther through tall grass. "You think you're brave now, with all of them watching," he hissed. "You think they'll step in once the bullets fly." He reached for his gun. Sheriff Warren's voice cracked like a whip. "Don't." Pike paused, his hand twitching just above the holster. "You fire that weapon," Warren said, raising his own, "and you're not a banker anymore. You're an outlaw, and I'll shoot you dead where you stand." Silence. Nora watched from the porch, the pistol still heavy in her hand. Pike's eyes darted to the crowd. No one moved, but none of them left, not this time. He lowered his hand slowly. "You'll regret this," he said through clenched teeth. "No," Reed said, "you will." Pike turned, mounted his horse, and without another word he rode out. His men followed. But not all of them. Boone hesitated, met Reed's eyes, then shook his head and turned back toward the road, but Merritt lingered longer. He looked at Nora, looked at the burned barn, looked at the people watching. And something in his face cracked. He dropped his shotgun in the dirt and walked away. That night the town didn't sleep much. But they gathered. Nora's house was full of soft conversation, food passed around, music strummed low on a guitar brought by the preacher's son. No dancing. Not yet, but the mood had shifted. $5,000. Dead or alive? Warren's eyes skimmed the wording again, though he didn't need to. He'd read enough of these in his time to know what it meant. Pike wasn't going to risk another public confrontation. He was done with threats. He was calling in every desperate gun west of the river, every hungry man with a bullet to spare and a grudge to nurse. Pike had opened the floodgates. Now the bounty would do his work for him. By dawn, word had spread. Nora stood at the edge of her field, the wind lifting strands of her hair as she read the copy of the bounty that Warren handed her. "They'll come," she said simply. "Yes," Warren replied. "From every direction. Half the men who fought in the last border skirmishes have nothing left but a horse and a rifle. This bounty will sound like salvation to them." Reed stood behind her, silent. He hadn't looked at the paper. Didn't need to. He could feel it in the ground beneath his feet, in the way the air had shifted. There was a new weight on his back, and it was heavier than any yoke Pike ever made him wear. "I'll leave," he said. Nora turned sharply. "What?" "If I go, maybe it dies with me. He doesn't want justice. He wants me gone." "You think if you vanish, Pike'll just stop," she snapped. "You think this ends with you in a ditch and him sipping wine on a hill somewhere. You don't get to martyr yourself and call that protection." Reed flinched. Sheriff Warren stepped in. "She's right. If you run, he'll just raise the price. And every man who shows up will think you're still here. They'll tear this town apart looking for you." Reed looked down. "Then what do I do?" "You stand," Warren said simply. "We all do." But standing didn't come easy. By the third day, the first bounty hunter arrived. He was tall, ragged, with a scar splitting his chin like a dry creek bed. Called himself Barlow. Rode into town slow, nodding to the children and tipping his hat like a gentleman. He went straight to the saloon, ordered a drink, and pinned the bounty to the wall like it was a wanted poster for a bear. Reed watched him from across the street, arms crossed. Warren approached Barlow first. "You planning to start trouble?" he asked. Barlow shrugged. "Just chasing coin, ain't no crime in that." "You fire a single shot in my town, I'll put one in your leg." Barlow smiled, full of yellow teeth. "Understood, Sheriff." That night 2 more riders arrived. By the week's end, there were 7. Most kept to the outskirts, camping along the creek, watching from a distance. But the tension grew like mold in a damp house. Reed couldn't walk to the well without feeling eyes on his back. Nora started locking the door even during daylight. Children were kept indoors. Storekeepers stopped asking for payment up front. They knew the town might not be here next week. Pike had poisoned everything without ever stepping foot in town again. Nora refused to leave. Every time Reed suggested she go stay with the preacher or take shelter near the sheriff's, she looked at him like he'd insulted her. "This is my land," she said. "My home. I ran once from death, from grief. I'm not running again." So they reinforced the cabin. Warren brought planks, sandbags, and a few extra rifles. The blacksmith fitted iron plates to the barn doors. A few men from town, those who remembered how to hold a gun and hadn't lost their conscience, offered to take turns keeping watch. Reed tried to keep his distance from them. He knew what they saw when they looked at him, trouble, the cause of this storm, but he didn't hide. He chopped wood, patched the fence, tended the hens. And at night he sat on the porch, rifle across his knees, eyes fixed on the dark horizon. Waiting. The second week turned violent. One of the bounty hunters, lean man, half drunk, called himself Cedar, approached Reed in the alley behind the store. "Saw your face on a poster," he said, voice slurred. "Funny thing, you don't look worth 5,000. Reed didn't respond. "You ain't even armed," Cedar continued, stepping closer. "What if I drag you by the hair to Pike and let him do the finish-in? Huh, what would that make me?" Reed didn't move. Until Cedar reached for the rope on his belt. Then Reed struck. It wasn't a clean fight. It wasn't elegant. But Reed had learned to survive. He slammed Cedar's wrist against the post, twisted until the man screamed, and dropped him in the mud with a knee to the ribs. Cedar didn't get up. Sheriff Warren arrived seconds later. "Get him out of here. he told 2 deputies. "He breathes wrong again, I'll bury him in the prairie." From then on, the bounty hunters kept their distance, but they didn't leave. They were waiting too. One morning, Nora came back from town with a bruise on her cheek. Reed stared. "Who?" "Doesn't matter," she said. "It does to me." She sat down on the porch and pulled the cloth from her basket. "The saloon's cook threw a bottle near the stove, said we were all bringing hell to Welton Ridge." Reed knelt beside her, gently lifting her chin to inspect the swelling. He looked at her as though the bruise had appeared on his own skin. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "Don't be," she said. "Just help me peel potatoes." That night, when the wind grew too sharp and the creaks too many, Reed sat beside her by the fire and said, "If anything happens to you—" "Don't," she said firmly. "I mean it." "So do I," her eyes locked with his. "You're not alone anymore, and neither am I." He didn't answer, just nodded once. It was enough. But the calm didn't last. It was the 3rd Sunday when it happened. Church had ended. The townsfolk lingered in the yard, talking low, some glancing toward the trail as if expecting the devil to ride in on a horse. He did. Pike arrived with 15 men. They weren't bounty hunters. These were soldiers, mercenaries with polished rifles and hardened eyes. Hired men with no stake in the land, no kin in the town, no past to be held against them. Warren met them in the street. "You're trespassing," he said. Pike dismounted. "I'm collecting what's mine." "No warrant, no law behind you. This is mob action, Pike." Pike pulled a paper from his coat. "State bounty, signed and sealed." Warren snatched it, scanned it, his jaw clenched. "You bring them to my town," he growled, "and you bring blood." "I bring closure," Pike replied. Then he turned to the crowd. "Reed Langston is a fugitive. You know it. You saw it. Anyone who gives him shelter is an accomplice. Anyone who defends him," his voice lifted, thunder in it now, "stands between me and justice." No one moved. "Last chance," Pike shouted. "You hand him over or I burn every building from here to the ridge." Silence. Then Nora stepped forward. "He's not hiding," she said. Reed came to her side. "He's right here," she added. "And if you want him, you'll have to kill every honest man and woman in this town to get to him." Warren raised his rifle. "So will I," he said. The blacksmith raised his too. Then the preacher. Then a dozen others. Pike looked around and saw not a frightened town, but a wall of flesh and fire and will. And for the first time, Emery Pike faltered. "You really want war?" he said, voice tight. "No," Warren said, "but I'll take it over surrender." Pike's hand hovered at his holster. Warren didn't blink. Pike's fingers twitched. Then a crack rang through the air. A single shot. No one moved. No one breathed. Then one of Pike's mercenaries slumped forward, blood blooming at his shoulder. Everyone turned. Reed lowered the smoking rifle. "Next one," he said, voice cold, "won't be a warning." Pike's face paled. And for the first time in his life, he backed down. Pike didn't speak as he turned his horse around. He didn't shout or hiss or curse. He simply clicked his tongue, nudged the gelding with his boot, and started down the trail he'd come up, slow, deliberate, the wind catching the tails of his coat like a man walking away from his own funeral. His hired men followed in silence, their rifles untouched, their eyes unsteady. He hadn't lost because he was outgunned. He lost because, for the first time, he was outnumbered by something he couldn't bribe or scare: conviction. The townspeople didn't cheer. They didn't move right away. They stood like trees rooted in earth scorched by lightning, waiting to see if the fire would return. And when Pike vanished beyond the ridge, only then did breath start to return to chests held tight for too long. Reed didn't lower his rifle until the dust of Pike's retreat had fully settled. Nora reached for his arm, fingers trembling. "It's over." Reed shook his head. "No, not yet." The next week passed in a strange haze, half celebration, half reckoning. The bounty was still technically valid, but Pike's name on it had been shamed in public, and no lawman west of the river dared carry out a writ they couldn't defend in court. The bounty faded like smoke, and Reed's name was no longer a hunted one. It became something else, spoken with respect, not pity. He was no longer the man who'd been dragged behind a banker's wagon. He was the man who stood, the man who didn't run, the man who fired the warning shot that sent a tyrant home empty-handed. Still, trust didn't bloom overnight. The town didn't magically heal. Some faces still turned away when he walked by. But others, more now, nodded, tipped their hats, left a pie on the porch. And Reed began to believe he wasn't just surviving anymore. One afternoon, the preacher stopped by the homestead. He found Reed at the edge of the field, fixing the irrigation line with his sleeves rolled high and sweat streaking the back of his neck. Nora was planting new onions by the fence line, humming something old and low under her breath. "Mind if I walk a while?" the preacher asked. Reed nodded, plenty of room. The two men walked in silence for a bit, boots crunching softly in the dirt. "I heard you used to whittle," the preacher said. Reed glanced over. "Still do." "Could have fooled me. Haven't seen a single carving in your house." "I burn 'em," Reed said quietly. "Why?" "Because every time I finish one, I see the hands that used to be shackled. Doesn't matter how pretty it is. Doesn't matter how smooth. I see the bruises on the knuckles and the rope scars at the wrist. I try to carve something new, but the past keeps showing up in the grain." The preacher nodded, not offering pity, only understanding. "You ever think maybe the past belongs in the grain? That every mark tells the truth of where you've been, and that's what makes it worth keeping." Reed didn't answer. Not then. But that night he took one of his carvings, a simple bird, wings stretched, and set it gently on the mantel above the hearth. Nora said nothing when she saw it, but she didn't stop looking at it either. The cabin began to feel like home again. Not just for Nora. For Reed. He stopped sleeping by the door. He started using the good mug, the one with the chip on the handle that Nora always said gave it character. He chopped more wood than they needed and didn't seem to mind when half of it just sat stacked under the porch. He started laughing again. Quietly at first, then louder. And then one morning, as the sun was rising gold and soft across the fields, he asked Nora a question he hadn't let himself speak before. "What do you want this place to be?" She looked at him, her eyes soft. "Home." "For just you?" he asked. She smiled. "No," she said, "not anymore." The first time Reed kissed her, it wasn't fireworks or rainstorms or breathless whispers. It was quiet. Simple. He was fixing the fence post that had warped in the rain, and she came over with a towel and a sigh about how stubborn he was. He took the towel, wiped the sweat from his brow, and when their hands brushed, he didn't pull away. She didn't either. He looked at her, really looked, and she smiled without shame. And that was all the invitation he needed. Their lips met in a way that felt less like a collision and more like a returning, like something had finally come home. They didn't speak of it right away. They didn't need to. It was months later when they heard the news. Pike was dead. Found face down in a creek 2 towns west, a bullet in his chest and no gold in his saddlebag. No one claimed responsibility. No one saw who did it. Some said it was one of his own men. Others said he crossed the wrong fence line on the wrong day. Sheriff Warren brought the news himself. "He's gone," he said. "No one's coming after you anymore." Reed didn't smile. Didn't cry. He just said, "I figured he'd end that way." Then he turned back to the plow and kept walking. Years passed. The bounty faded into legend. Children whispered about the man who once dragged a banker's wagon and the widow who defied him. The story changed, grew, blurred. Some said Reed had killed Pike with his own hands. Others claimed Nora had shot him through the heart and buried the gun. The truth was simpler. They lived. They planted. They loved. And one spring morning, when the first daffodils bloomed at the edge of the field, Nora gave birth to a daughter with her father's eyes and her mother's fire. They named her Mercy. Because that's what saved them. Because it's what Pike never had. Because even the worst wounds, if tended with time and truth, can become roots for something good. And in the end, Reed Langston, the man who once crawled through the dirt with rope on his back, died an old man on his own land with his hand in Nora's and his children at his side. Not as a slave, not as a fugitive, but as a man, free,